Former SECT members share their worst experiences. I don't know if it is exactly a cult, but I was a member of it. In my student days there was an entity called Campus and Professional Crusade for Christ, sometimes called CRU. It is a very common Christian men's organization on many college campuses, and it functions as a cult. I went to a Methodist college and it wasn't too Christian or anything. It was really like a regular college, but CRU was a little different in some ways. There was a lot of respect among the campus leadership and the local pastors, because it was a Christian entity, but it had a bad reputation among the students who weren't interested, or had left that place. I still remember it vividly. Freshman year, the first week in college, I went to the organization fair, because I was excited to join some kind of club or something. I guess I looked lost and lonely, so someone who wasn't in any of the clubs approached me, and started telling me about this men's club. Being that I was a practicing Catholic, I decided to try it out right away. In the first group chat, they talked about nothing but handjobs, and how bad it was. I had just met these people, and the first thing they asked me was how often I touched myself. After several meetings, I admit that they made me feel very bad about myself, convinced that I was a horrible, depraved person. In retrospect, I think this was similar to what we call incels and NOFAP today. They wanted to control every aspect of my life. You could only deal with other CRU members, and you always had to let them know where you were going and who you were with. I had to show my laptop browser history, and I'd better not even think about deleting it. You also couldn't have ties to women for any reason. And for a while, I did all this. They made me feel really bad about myself, and after some reflection, I realized that the only people who encouraged me to hate myself were those CRU bastards. I didn't consider myself an atheist until many years later, but in retrospect, my experience with those people was the first time I saw that religion was harmful. In later years, I realized that this is how they prey on naive children. They get them before they've had a chance to make other friends, and I was exactly the gullible fool they were looking for. The club president was only a student on a technicality, never graduated, and only took the minimum number of classes to be considered a student. He only stayed in college to run that club. He was in his 30s. In my later college years, many of us lost a lot of friends to CRU. Once they joined that, you never heard from them again unless they left the club. From what I heard, they also handle your money and operate as a pyramid scheme. In my opinion, that was a cult. When I was 16 or 17, I went to the Hope Church Youth Club, forced by my mother, because I had no friends after moving to a new county. It was fine at first, then the forced worship started, discrimination if you had mental problems like, for example, autism, being forced to sit during worship, and tolerating all that crap coming from the leaders, telling you that you needed to bring God into your life to improve your mental health, and that you needed to accept Jesus. The problem was that the youth club announcement omitted all the forced worship. The church itself was under construction for 6 years, because they decided they should use the donations to build a new church, as apparently, God told them to. This resulted in a constant economic crisis situation, and I still wonder why it took them so long to finish the damn church. I heard that the situation has worsened and that it now functions as a school, when it is supposed to be a youth club. I only got my mother to stop forcing me, because I told her about the worship and my brother's treatment. Even now I see leaders staring at me or going out of their way to make me feel uncomfortable. There used to be a store in town, closed because of the pandemic, where one of the leaders worked. I went in there one day and saw that he sold movie stuff and albums, among other things. He went out of his way to approach me and demanded that I empty my pockets, because he was sure I had stolen something. He even made me go through the identifier at the entrance of the store, unable to find anything to incriminate me with. Also, the main leader started messaging me on Facebook asking me why I wasn't coming back. I blocked him and warned them that if they continued to harass me I would take legal action. I may be an atheist, but I swear that this so-called church is a cult disguised as a church. I am a former Jehovah's Witness. I was truly dedicated to my beliefs. I knocked on doors 70 hours a month, read the Bible along with the books provided by the church, and was a perfect man of this institution. I was a full-fledged Jehovah's Witness. In my early 20s I began to have doubts, as they controlled many aspects of our lives, such as the clothes we wear, the things we consume, and who our friends are. I had been working in retail for a while, and for all the hundreds of people I worked with, I knew with certainty that they were as loving, compassionate and intelligent as the best witnesses I knew. That led me to deconstruct major doctrine, including the salvation monopoly. Witnesses believe that Armageddon is imminent, and only baptized active witnesses will survive. God and his angels are going to kill everyone else, which includes 99% of humanity, while the witnesses will live forever in a paradisiacal, and perfectly sinless, land. This really did not sit well with me. After a couple of questioning the elders of the institution, consulting the literature published by the organization, and even writing to headquarters and not getting satisfactory answers, I finally began to investigate outside the organization, something the witnesses might call apostate research. Witnesses believe that anyone who criticizes the organization is an apostate, the ultimate expression of Satan's influence in the world. Just seeing the information almost destroyed my marriage, until she too woke up and retired with me. As I read all about the experiences of other former witnesses, a light bulb went off. Of course I'm in a cult, how did I not know? My wife and I left, and have been rebuilding our lives ever since. Of course, I had to make new friends outside of that place. I grew up as a Christadelphian and moved away from that in my late teens. Christadelphian doctrine is almost identical to that of Jehovah's Witnesses, in that they believe that Jesus will return to earth at any time, to establish God's eternal kingdom on earth. We were taught that we would fight the battle of Armageddon with God, Jesus, and the angels, and that every unbeliever would be destroyed at the end of the millennium. That was all I knew, but when I told my friends at work or school, they always thought it was crazy and said, "Oh, so you're in a cult." As I got older, I questioned everything and decided that this wasn't what I really believed, and even if it were true, it wasn't something I wanted to be a part of. Every aspect of our life was controlled by the church, and anything fun was essentially frowned upon. Finally, I decided that I didn't want to waste my current life being unhappy, in exchange for something after this life that is not 100% guaranteed. I now live my life for me and the people I care about. No more Bible reading, praying and worshiping a God I don't even believe in. I'm glad I was able to get out, as is my wife, and live a good life. However, that kind of upbringing is something that affects you forever, and I still notice it influences the way I think and view the world. I'm working to leave this mentality behind, but it's definitely difficult. I try my best to be kind and loving to everyone I come across, because I still feel guilty about my upbringing, which sometimes leads me to have hatred toward sinners. This may be offensive to some people, as evangelicalism is more prominent in the US, but I was born into a cult, Pentecostalism. Fortunately, I escaped before I spent too much time there. I didn't make a conscious decision to leave at the time, but I knew of a few cases over the years, and I definitely became convinced that the born-again people are basically cultists and very dangerous people. A couple of things I have to say. My mother got married at 16 and immediately took care of the house, with several people living there. There was no reading of anything other than the Bible, preferably the Old Testament, and no talking unless a man asked you. I was also beaten by several family members for minor infractions. They tried to kill me after I was born, because they thought I was somehow conceived of sin, and might have Satan in me. This is what drove my mother to leave there, when she found my father trying to end my life in the crib. Practically everyone in the family beat their wives, and were extremely uneducated men. Again, the boys could read anything, but the girls could only listen to the gospel and never watch television, and so on. I was introduced to my biological father about 6 years ago. I did not speak to him or communicate with him, but his family reached out and found me, and a sort of reconnection or reconciliation process began. Apparently, my father had been in prison for the last 10 years, and his sister showed up to pick him up. She explained to me quite matter-of-factly that it was her unceasing prayer and faith in God which freed her brother from hell. He ended up dying years later, but through this, I discovered that I have 5 other siblings from 3 different women, and possibly some more. They are all on the Jesus train. A lot of people think that if you do good deeds, the bad ones are erased, or at least people think that's how Christianity works. Well, no, the reality is that almost all bad deeds can be erased through faith. That is why my father was absolved of being a wife beater, adulterer, drug addict and potential murderer, because he turned to God and was baptized again before he died. In the scriptures, as long as the Lord possesses your heart, you are his vessel and you are acting according to his plan. Anything can be forgiven, even messing with children. At first, my unknown family was willing to try to connect with me, even though I told them straight out that I am not straight, and that I am an atheist. This made the reconnection only last about 5 minutes, but I'm not like one of those atheism people who tattoos an upside-down cross, and convulses every time someone mentions God, but I grew up in an area where things like Pentecost are not that common, and based on my experiences, I would say that I think the born-again people are very stupid and dangerous. I would caution everyone to stay away, particularly women. I'm not sure if this technically counts as a cult, but I think it's a cult-like situation. I grew up in the Midwest, and was sent to a private school from kindergarten through 6th grade. It's not widely known, but in the Midwest there are a lot of micro-churches that are run by someone's uncle or something, and it's just God-based brainwashing. You donated all your money to the church, spoke in strange tongues, and watched the leader cure diseases and illnesses during church meetings. This leader was usually a sleazebag, sleeping with half the women in his congregation, regardless of their marital status. If you were caught doubting your faith, you had to talk to the pastor who would judge you, and they even did it with young children. I have heard of people being banished and could not return to church. This happened when I was in 5th grade at that private school. I liked my teacher very much. She was a religious woman, super kind and gentle, and she was the first adult I felt comfortable with in a long time, due to my bad home life. I felt she was a trustworthy adult, so I asked her questions I knew I shouldn't ask. Some of them aimed to ask if God existed, and why my life was so hard, why God was mean to me and stuff. That didn't go well, and I ended up sitting with a grown man next to me on a tiny couch in the pastor's office, while he sat at his huge wooden desk and stared at me. I was a super little girl and very thin, and because of my father's abuse of me, I was terrified of all grown men. I remember shaking, crying, and literally almost peeing myself. Fortunately, I didn't get a big punishment like some. It was basically a lecture about needing to have faith to get to heaven, and that I was letting God down, that he loves me and all that crap. I just remember agreeing and apologizing because I was terrified. But when I left that office and went to wash my face between sobs, I looked in the mirror before going back to class, and realized I was fed up. Fortunately, my mom found out about the situation, and ended up taking me out of that school, and enrolling me in another private school along with my siblings, and we also changed churches. The need for 3 big, grown men to bully a little girl like me is insane, and now as an adult, I am flabbergasted. Fortunately, that episode did not escalate. While I appreciate my mother for handling herself well and getting me out of the situation, that meeting was my wake-up call. I have not participated in any religious activities since then, and will not do so again. I post this from a secondary account because people know my real account. I was sent to a school run by a cult. My parents didn't find out about it until 12 years later. I had been there since kindergarten. It wasn't until around 7th or 8th grade that I realized I was in a cult. There were mandatory uniforms, only approved hairstyles were allowed, and you couldn't talk to people not affiliated with the school. We had a 225-day school year. During my time there, I suffered a lot of emotional abuse, and there was a lot of pressure on me to succeed in my studies. We were told almost daily that we were better than other students, and that we should not waste this opportunity, but in a threatening, non-reassuring way. If you got a grade below 80%, it was considered a failing grade. You needed your parents to sign a form acknowledging that failing an assignment. We were taught to internalize that feeling of failure, to the point that I cried for an hour after receiving a 79% on my first essay in college. They had a huge obsession with the US. We were never taught anything from a non-US perspective. If the US wasn't involved in a conflict, we never knew about it. I got into some of the best universities in the United States, having learned nothing about pre-colonial America. There are many more memories, but most I have blocked out. I am in weekly therapy, and many alumni refer to ourselves as survivors. I am lucky to have no physical scars. I can't say the same for many of my class. I rely on many factors to view it completely as a cult, but the first of them came when I was 16 years old. For the record, I was born and raised as a Jehovah's Witness, who are adamantly against blood transfusions. I mean, if they find out you need one to save your life and you accept it, they will push you away, which also means you won't have a wonderful life forever. When I was 16, my cousin, who I was very close to and who was also a Jehovah's Witness, got cancer. Up to that point, he had been a very good, super religious kid. The type of cancer he had could be treated by getting a blood transfusion, otherwise, he would die from the disease. We were talking on the phone one night, and I can still hear the fear in the voice of that person, who I always thought was the coolest person in the world, when he said, "I don't want to make Jehovah angry, but I'm just a kid. I don't want to die yet." Hearing her say that to me made me stop and question a lot of things. Right then and there, I told her to get the transfusions and that I would always stand behind her. Like most Jehovah's Witnesses, I used to go knocking on doors when I was younger, but I never did it again, because I didn't want to try to convert someone to something I didn't believe in 100%.